And okay, so here is our paper here, first of all. So the first thing I'm going to do is find my circles. Now, it's not just going to put circles on the surface in any old hair. What you'll notice is that I'm starting with my smaller circle here. What we'll notice is that they're a slight angle. They're not just one on top of the other, very evenly spaced. So I'm going to start off, I might go smaller than this, but I'm just drawing that one out to kind of say, right, that's sort of maybe nearly at the bottom of my circle. So I'm going to go up a size now. But I'm going to use this masking tape so you can see through how I'm doing this. When I put the next circle in, it's almost going to be overlapping the first one that I've put in, and then it's just going to come, so it's not evenly spaced, it's got an overlap. So I hope you can see that all right on the camera. You've got, so I've got two circles and I've got one kind of coming above the other, and that's kind of starting to give me that feeling that I'm looking into a tunnel, which is what I'm trying to get to. So I've got two, so at the moment it looks like a sort of like a moon, but kind of pointing downwards, that kind of shape there. So I'm going to now put another circle. Again, I'm going to go big on the next big circle. I've got a bowl. I might be going a bit too big. Let's try. I've got a saucer. It's obviously you can use a set of compasses and draw it all properly, and that's probably a lot easier. But I just didn't want to have people having to get the geographic, sort of mass sets out to do them. So if I just put a saucer in around there, and again, you see the way that it's sort of higher up, so that I've got more space up here, and they're almost sort of touching, kind of going down here, and that's sort of like starting to give me a kind of tunnel kind of feel already, kind of going down. And then I'm going to go smaller now. I want to get a smaller one inside that circle, so I'm going to use my circle drawing stencil, because it's quite useful, because it's quite see-through. And with this smaller one, I'm actually going to, I don't know if I go in really close, you can see that I've got it almost disappearing off this line here. So I'm not going to draw the whole circle. I'm going to do come over the top, and then when I hit that edge, I'm going to stop like that, and then that's starting to give me even more of a kind of hole going down. So this is all my sort of disappearing into it kind of hole. I kind of need to have one, if I can, in between, sort of in there, but I'm not sure if I've got anything that's going to be exactly that size. But because we're not trying to do a sort of architectural drawing, I'm going to just sketch in roughly a sort of intermediate, or the sort of second size one. And I'm not going to do a lot more than this, because you could obviously get a giant piece of paper and do like loads, going, oh, it's a bit wobbly, but will forgive me. We could do loads, going down and down and down, and make it really dramatic, and that would be a brilliant project to draw over a nice holiday period, but we'll keep it slightly controllable. So now I've got my sort of tunnel of shape sort of going in. I might just slightly sketch, not really a whole circle, but just I'm going to think about just getting a tiny bit of shading into everything that I do around here, so that it's just starting to kind of get some shadow into that area. So that's kind of my tunnel framework. So having that framework to work around will hopefully make things feel a little less daunting. And one of the things I really want to get in is the way that he had little white leaves overhanging this very dark space. So I know that this is my darkest sort of space in here. So everything sort of around this area and outwards is going to be the brightest and the sort of whitest area. So I'm going to start by doing some shapes that are on the outside edge that aren't going to have any shading on them. Just to show you, before we get into actually drawing on here, I'm going to grab a spare piece of paper and just show you some of the shapes that we're going to be doing. Obviously, you can do any kind of shapes that you want. There isn't anything that you're comfortable doing is going to be fine. But I'm going to do sort of flowery ones, or sort of ones that are based on a kind of floral feel. So we can do ones, they are always going to be very, very simple. So we can do ones that start with a proper daisy shape. So they've got like a daisy circle, and then just have some petals coming round, long teardrop petals. Some of them can overlap, some of them don't have to. And I sort of find that I sort of am running slightly behind myself and have to catch up occasionally to get them to all fit round. But something that looks vaguely daisy-like, like that, sort of a daisy. Very, very simple. We can do our kind of, remember we had that flower that we did on a previous week where we do like a heart shape first and then a triple heart shape next, and maybe a sort of wobbly one kind of coming into that centre point, and then we do lines coming out, and you can even turn those into petal shapes as well, kind of filling in that space. That was another one that we do quite a lot. So a lot of them are going to be shapes that we've used before that we're kind of going to revisit. Then we can have just very simple leaf shapes. So literally just a sort of long oval, like not oval, teardrop, isn't it really? And then with some veins through the middle, just to make it look a bit more leafy. And then quite a nice one, that this is a real classic one that comes from my beloved Delftware China, which I drew a lot. So we would just do a simple circle, maybe with an inner circle, and then we do some little tiny bumps going round, just like little dinosaur bumps, so like a tiny daisy like that. But then we build an extra layer on top, and this sort of heart-shaped petal that we've got here, we do the same sort of thing, but it just disappears behind those daisy bumps, and just go round and do an extra level of big petals. And you can, if you want to increase that and make it, even more dramatic, you can do a second, sometimes I'll do like a second row going round where you might have maybe extra bumps. It's a little bit like a Tudor rose, isn't it? It's got that sort of feel, but it was a very popular way of drawing flowers on Delftware and old ceramics and things. And then if you want to add shading to it, you can just come in, and they often have some little lines coming off round where those little bumps are. And they just flick some little paintbrush lines up from the sort of using those little bumps to guide into that bigger petal space. And that just gives us a little bit of shading, and it starts to make the sort of middle bit pop out. And you can see how you could use all sorts of colours in here. You could use watercolours and pencils and things to go back later and sort of give it some tone. But that's a very simple and very effective way of doing flowers. We're going to be using some of our lovely curlicues because there's always room to put some curlicues in, and with some bumps going round. So it's all the kind of patterns that we've been using up until now, just done in a much sort of bigger scale. Okay, so those are kind of the basic ones that we'll do. Sometimes if you want to do like a little half flower, if they're all packed in together, you can do like a little half moon sticking out, little bump, and then build another little flower head off that. So you only see half of a flower, and that gives us a sense of things like clustering and crowding together like that. And we could always do some other, this kind of leaf shape is quite popular. Well, that one's gone a bit wobbly, but things sort of like that, where you've got this sort of long heart-shaped leaf. Well, it's not really heart shape, but it's sort of like, starts off being a heart and then it grows an extra bump. Antlers, that's what it reminds me of, like deer antlers, that sort of thing. But basically very sort of simple shapes, nothing too strange and weird. And I think to begin with, we'll keep it really simple, and then we'll branch out or flower out into something a bit more unusual as we sort of feel confident about where everything's going. So that's only the kind of shapes that we're going to be using. Pen-wise, this first level of flowers, floral work we're going to do, we're going to use our largest sort of size pen, and then as we go down into the hole, we're going to use a smaller pen gradually. Not, if you wanted to, you could use a smaller pen, a finer pen for each level going down. But that'll also help give us that feeling of things disappearing, because the lines are going to be finer as they go further away. You also have to remember Father Ted on this one. These ones are small, these ones are far away. So as things go farther away, they look smaller. So we use thinner pens to make them look smaller. I put a 0.3 out and I want a 0.5. So let me just get my 0.5. Right, here we go. 0.6. Right, this is going to be my sort of outside pen. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a couple of pieces here that are going to overlap the very dark centre of my Doodle of Doom. So they're going to be, I think I can just turn my light a bit more, there we go, let's get a bit more light on it. They're going to be overlapping this sort of shape here. So I'm just going to do a little leaf to begin with, just a very simple leaf, just branching out over that space. And what I'll do is we'll go all the way round and then we'll start going down. And then obviously you can go back later and fill in the doodles kind of coming out this way. So there's my little leaf just sort of sticking out over the edge there. And I want to do some of these, but I don't want to do too many because, again, I don't want to crowd that space completely. So once I've done that here, we'll pop a daisy in next to it. So just a little simple round and some daisy petals coming round. And again, we're going to draw in the main kind of feature pieces, as it were, going round, and then we'll fill back in the gaps, and so that eventually all of the surface will be covered. But we're going to start off by putting the main kind of players in, as it were. So I want to have one kind of around here next, so let's do another kind of flowery shape. Let's do slightly sort of like spade, that's what I'm thinking, what's the word? Playing cards. That's what I'm struggling to say. I like the spade that you get in playing cards. So you do them coming round and just leaving that centre blank like that, and it becomes like a little heart, like a little dark centre for your flower. And then you've got the fifth one in there, and then I can fill that in with a kind of black centre like that. So I've now got two little flowers just coming in there. Okay, and then as we're going to move round, we'll just think of some other little shapes. Let's do some other leaf shapes. And I'm just pausing slightly because for some reason my right eye has decided to water appallingly and has now filled up with mascara just to... So I'm drawing this with one eye closed, which it seems to be just adding unnecessary complications to this. But anyway, so if it goes slightly wonky, it's because I've got one eye. I'm desperately trying to blink my eye clear. Right, so then I've got a black centre there, and I'm going to do some daisy bumps coming round that one. That's it, so that gives me a small kind of neat daisy shape. And let's do a sort of sideways shape. So if I do a sort of V shape coming off there, and then put a nice fat round into it, and then I can put two little curlicue kind of leaves coming off it, like that. And we can do a row of bumps, and then we can build another row of bumps on top of that, and another row of bumps. I'm sitting here drawing with tears rolling down my face like I'm terribly moved by my art. It's really just moved by mascara. However, and then I can just put a few little lines just flicked in to that there and make sort of like a nice over the top kind of flowery shape. So we're coming round a bit further around this side. So I think some leaves. Again, like a little cluster. And they're slightly going to be just overlapping at the base. I mean, any shapes, any flowery shapes that you like doing are going to work really well in this. They're going to give that fantastic sort of millefleury effect over the top. But they don't have to be difficult and to draw. So I think, I can see a shape here. Look, if I do a shape kind of coming out like a sort of trumpet, This is quite a good one. And then you can, let me just tilt the camera around a little bit. And then we can do a little sort of wobbly line across the top like that. And then do some stamen kind of, just two long sort of shapes coming out. And then do another wobbly line, but you stop it by the stamen like that. And it's got a feeling a bit like a lily, I suppose, or one of those sort of things. And you can always do a few lines just flicking up like that, just to give it a bit more depth. Then here I'm going to do a nice big sort of like a tropical leaf petal. So a ginkgo leaf, that's the word I'm thinking of it. So it has this sort of like fat shape with a kind of point over it like that. And then it has some lines just coming along the surface and stretching around the shape, just giving it a bit of definition. So it could be a sort of, it's got those nice thick veins on it, a little bit like a tropical plant would have. So these shapes that we're going to come with here, they are going to be overlapping a sort of area of darkness, but not quite as dark as the ones down the front. So I'm just going to put a little spray of curlicues coming round like that, and then let's put some bumps on that one. That's it, and a little bump around the top of this one. There we go, that's lovely. Right, and then I think I'm going to come round to this other side now. So I am sort of following my lines, but I'm just going to, you can see I'm sort of heading off into space here. So I want to kind of get them all going a similar weight at the same time. And I'm going to have to try and find a tissue because I'm really weeping quite brokenly here. It's like for some reason like peeling onions. Right, okay, so that's better. Oh, that's better. Right, so on this side I'm going to do a curly kind of fern shape that's going to come round, and then they're going to have little bumps just coming off like that. And so if you see a shape that I do and you haven't seen it before, you can always watch the first time I do it, or you can stick it in the memory bank and then it might come out later. And you can sort of draw it in a bit later and see how that fits, how it works for you. And the good thing about this is it's going to have such a lot of surface going on. If you do what doesn't quite work out, you can always kind of like draw some other stuff around it and kind of hide it in all the other things that are going on. And then let's put a daisy in on this side. So just nice little petal shapes going round. And a little line on each one just gives it a bit of surface like that. And right, the next one I'm going to come round here, and I think we'll do one of these sort of sideways flowers again. So I do a curly kind of leaf on one side, and then the same sort of curly leaf as close as I can get it on that side. And then I'm just going to tilt my camera a little bit. And then we'll do like a sort of half moon, filling that, and sometimes I make it into a double half moon, and then it's tiny bumps coming round. And then we'll do some of these bigger petals, just sort of nice wibbly jelly kind of shapes, like that. And a few little, I like to put a little line into the tiny bump, and just a few lines dividing that sort of lower section up. So we're just sort of at the moment seeing a nice collection of flowers starting to bloom. So we're going to come up here then, and I think I will put a snail shell kind of curl in, and then give it some petal bumps coming round. That's quite a satisfying one to do. It's like a little sort of dinosaur tail kind of all curled up. I'm just going to move my camera over a little bit, that's better. Because it's kind of weird, it's right in front of me, so it's like drawing around. It's like someone standing, and I've gone to the cinema and there's someone sitting in front of me with a hat that's getting in the way. So I'm going to have to look past my camera. So I'm just doing a little daisy And I'm going to put some dots in the middle of that one just to make it a bit different. And then we're going to have some leaves. And then by the time I get up this side, I've got to start thinking, right, so what have I used already that I want to sort of use again that I'm quite liking? So I think I'm going to do another one of those sort of lily flowers that I did before, as I've got these leaves here. So that was doing the kind of trumpet shape coming out like that. That's right, like a sort of long, soft V shape. And then a wibbly line just going along like that. And then the sort of stamen bit coming through and wibbly line, but just letting it go behind those two stamen, and that's sort of made like a lily shape. And then I can put some longer leaves, just an elongated leaf shape. If you put like a sort of line going down the middle, that really makes it look more like a lily, because they always have that kind of crease going on. And I've just made a folded one there by imagining that there's a fold and it's just hooking over. I said, if any of these escape you, don't worry, just do the ones that you're confident in doing, because we're really looking at how to get the sense of depth going, and that's the most important thing. I mean, you could totally do this with just rows and rows and rows of circles getting darker and lighter, or snail shapes, or a shape that you're really confident in drawing, and it will still look really, really effective. So here I think we want another flower going around there. I'm going to do another one of those nice big fat ginkgo leaves in a minute. So I'm going to do a daisy flower coming round, and my eye has stopped burning and weeping quite so much now, so that's good to know. I probably look like a panda on one side, but we shall see at the end of the class, won't we? And just some small leaves coming off that one. I might do a third one coming out over the space there. So you can see, you can just about see this little faint line that I'm following, so you can sort of see where I'm going up round with this. And then I'm going to do another this big ginkgo leaf shape again. So that's just a nice big sort of blob shape like that. And then imagining that all those veins are kind of fanning out through the leaf. And as they spread out, they just come further apart. So I'm imagining there's a point down below where they're all coming back down to, just like a sort of fan. And that just gives that quite a nice sort of like a bromeliad kind of feel, if you know your houseplants, or if you like houseplants. And I'll do another one. I think I'll do another one just on that as well. I quite like that one. So let's do another one, just so it's in a pair. Just bring lines down. It's very popular in doodle art, the ginkgo leaf. A lot of people use it in a lot of designs. I believe it has lots of resonance in Japanese mythology, because the ginkgo in Chinese and Japanese herbalism is meant to be very energizing and generally very good for everybody to take. So I think it represents health and long life and those sort of good things. Right, so let's just come up a little bit. So we're now going to sort of we're around the top, and we're going to eventually get this first ring of flowers and things in place. So I'm going to put a daisy. I'm going back to the other side now. I should have said that, but you probably noticed that. I'm going to sort of pop back to the right hand side now. I do find if I'm not trying to get anything symmetrical, there's definitely nothing symmetrical going to be happening in this, but we do want a kind of rhythm as we're going round, and I find it works better if you kind of do you sort of do each side in each turn, rather than just going all the way round the top in one go. I find this works better to sort of get a sense of balance. There's a lily flower somewhere going to appear around here now, so I'm going to do its leaf first. So I'm going to do like a bent triangle like that, and then bring it up again. So it's like it's actually like a sort of Star Trek comms badge sign, if you know your sci-fi. And then the trumpet's going to come out of that, and then it's wiggly line, and the two little stamen kind of coming through, and just to sort of bring that off into the sort of lily shape, and then another long bend sort of line like that, and I can put some lines just coming through. I think what I may have to do is just slightly lower my paper because I've started a little bit high, and if I get too high, I can't quite get everything in on my camera because it can only stretch so far. So I'll just move my paper down a tiny bit. Right, so, and then I think if in doubt, do a daisy. I think that's going to be our motto for tonight. So if you're working out what to do next, do a daisy, because that can fit in nicely with everything. And they've got a nice sort of rhythm going around with some dots in the middle. And there we go. And then I can put some leaves. I think we need some more leaves. And just put a little centre line through them like that to start giving that sort of leaf. But I think I have a few more coming around this side as well. Just to sort of lots of leaves all the way around. A bit like an extra level kind of building round, but just sort of flowing like that. Right, okay, so I think we'll have some, what haven't got? We've got those wobbly leaves that I did earlier, so let's try doing those again. So they're sort of like fern leaves, so they come up in an S bend like that, and then you've got like wibble wobbles coming down, sort of like antlers, I suppose, in a way, but they sort of are based on kind of curly fern fronds, which is quite difficult to say. And then I'm going to bring another one kind of curling up around them in the same kind of feel, like that, sort of like big shapes coming through. Now eventually, obviously I want to try and get as much of this surface covered as possible so that we don't have any obvious gaps, but we can sort of go back later and infill with all sorts of little circles and scribbles and curls and shapes, so we don't have to worry about that too much now. Again, doing a daisy flower because, as I said before, if in doubt, do a daisy. And I can just put a little line down each petal. It just gives it a little bit of form. I think it works really well. Okay, so I'm going to follow this line going over the top here. So I'm going to pop back over this side now. And actually, I'm just going to put a snail curl sort of shell in here because I've got one here. So I'm going to put one sort of opposite it. So I'm just going to do a nice fat spiral, just going round and it disappears into the sort of daisy flowers, and just put some bumps around the top like that. So it's kind of, so again, we're not really going for symmetry, but we should sort of start to see our favourite shapes kind of reoccurring, the ones that we really like. And so you might want to slightly balance them. If you've got something happening down here that you like, you might want to kind of sort of do it up here as well. Not fanatically, but just so that there's, like, as I said, it's more about creating a sense of rhythm rather than anything else. So on this side here, I'm going to come around. I think we need to do a smallish flower here, just to sort, because we've got quite this big leaf here. So I'm going to do a sort of sideways flower again. So that's where you have a curl coming out to make one side of the trumpet sort of form, and another curl here. But rather than the trumpet, we're going to do the half moon that comes in across like that. So it gives us a really nice, always a shape like that, gives us loads of things to kind of build other patterns off, because then we can just do some rows of bumps coming round, and just then some slightly wibbly wobbly next level petals. And we could always build this even further and make it a bit bigger, but I'm not going to go for two huge ones on this because they might be a bit dominant, or it might be quite nice to do one big one, maybe sort of up here. We'll get around to it and we'll see. And then I can just put a little line through each of those petals like that. So that's sort of quite a nice one sort of coming through there. Then I think we'll do, remember we did that one that was like sort of the ace of spades. So that's some sort of flat bottom shapes like that, and where they don't quite touch, they leave a space, and that becomes the centre of the flower. And so that comes around like that, and then we can make that darker by drawing little circles in it, and then just bring a line through those. Slightly curved line or sort of wobbly line gives them a bit more surface rather than just doing a completely straight line. And we can put some leaf shapes underneath, really just different because these ones are going to have those little lines branching out from the central stem. But even though they're very similar in shape, just doing that little detail immediately identifies them as being a leaf rather than a petal. So I just bring a little collection of lines, diagonal chevrons, just to meet that central vein, and that looks like a leaf, whereas beforehand it looked like a petal. Okay, so I think I'm going to do here a slightly bigger flower. It's going to be quite sort of a bit more, I mean, chunky is really the wrong word for flower, isn't it? But, you know, something a bit more substantial, just so it's not too symmetrical. So I'm going to do a centre point circle and then take another loop round just to give it a bit more emphasis. And then I'm going to do my row of tiny daisy petals, which right now look very small. And they're just going to come round that central circle like that. And then I'm going to do a second layer of the sort of wobbly petals, like sort of heart shape, but as if the heart point was buried into the centre of the flower. And if they overlap slightly, that's absolutely fine. You just sort of tuck one behind the other as you go round. So that's sort of like the sort of like rosette kind of flower. And then the next level of petals I'm going to do, I'm going to make them go between the centre points of each of the ones on the row before, really. So they're going to stretch round and be longer. And so you just sort of see almost like a sort of fancy bracket or a kind of elongated shape going round. Because when you look down on a flower, you don't see all the petals, you just see the tops of them where they're sort of all growing out from the stem. So that's really quite a big kind of Tudor rose kind of feel to it. And then I want to do some sort of leaf coming off that. So I'm going to do a curly leaf. That's it. And then just some little fronds coming round, and with one on the same side, but I'm going to make it so that it points the other way. So instead of going up that way, it's going to come round and point down like that and wiggle round. Right, and I think I'm going to repeat them on each side. So because at the moment it looks slightly like it's got some big hands that it's holding out. So I think I'm going to just put a couple more in so that it looks less, well, even if it looks less like, it either looks less like two hands or more like a monster with lots of hands. Well, we'll keep going. It's fine. Just put a few more in like that. So you've got them sort of nesting round, and we'll just keep going. And then a little one maybe coming round. I think that's working better to have kind of three. So it's got like, imagine it's got sort of big cabbagey kind of leaves. Let's put another one up in here. And they're facing each other, they'll make quite a nice pattern. There you go. So that's quite a monstrous plant. I quite like that in a way. And then I can just put some little, like I did on the sample, just some lines kind of coming round into those petals, leaving the white, the bumps completely white, and just as a kind of basis to come round. There you go. And that just, you know, obviously you can go back and spend more time putting little details up this round, but I want to get round to join up the first kind of level, not least because I promised myself a slurp of tea when I get round there, so it's very exciting. And so I'm going to do a little daisy here. I've gone very small, so I'm subconsciously copying the one next to it, so I'm going to have to do this a bit bigger, but I shall do some long petals. I always think of them as being like rabbit's ears. They're very long and thin, and they don't really have any overlap because they just come round in a long whirl like that. I'm going to tuck it behind the monster leaves if I need to as I come round. There we go. So that's a more kind of like earthly daisy. earthly. Yes, I think I'm going to go, I'm quite happy with earthly. And then, oh, just got another bit here to fill in. So let's go for perhaps one of our leaves. So some leaf shapes. That's it. And just put some little lines in, and another leaf shape. Just to sort of, with the veins, that just makes all the difference. That's it. And I'm going to do a little half sort of flower again, kind of coming up here. So a curly Q on that side and one on this side, and then my half moon double line like that, and then some lines fanning out from that center point, and some bumpy petals across the top with a line just up the middle to give them a bit of form. And we've got to have something to join this up, haven't we? So let's have some leaves coming out of this shape here. And if they hit another shape, you've just got to decide whether they're going to go underneath or fit exactly in the space. So just some pointy leaf shapes with a single vein, and you can add the veining in to make those look more like leaves. And so we have gone all the way round once, and this is our top level. From here on in, this is where things are going to start falling down. So that's where we are. We've gone all the way round once. I'm just going to mute and have my tea as a reward. Right, okay, so what we're going to have to think about is that the sort of flowers that we do on these lower levels have got to start getting a little bit smaller than the ones on the upper levels, because of course they're going away from us. We've got to imagine this is going down into the depths, so they have to get slightly smaller. And I thought it'd be quite nice. I'm just going to colour in the very close edge of this sort of dark hole around these leaves, so we can just get the feeling of how that's going to look. You don't have to do this bit yet if you're feeling not brave enough quite yet to do it. I'm going to use, a lot of time in a pack of pens you get like a fine brush pen. So I'm going to use a brush pen just really just for speed. But it does have quite a nice fine point on it, as you can see. So what we're going to be doing is this section in here is going to be where it's really dark, because this is the dark centre of our Doodle of Doom. So I know this bit is going to be really dark, and you can see how that's helping straight away to get our leaves to kind of stand out for being really white against that darkness. But it just starts to show you where that kind of, how that feel's going to come. I'm not going to do too much. I can do some in the centre, because I know this is going to be completely black, but I'm not going to go up to the edge of that line yet, because I want to draw some of the little tiny plants still in this sort of section. And I want to leave some white paper so that I can control how bright they are. But that's starting to show where that hole's going to come in the universe. So we're sort of imagining there's like floors, aren't there? So that this sort of plants are moving away sort of flat on each side, so they're sort of growing out of the side. So we're going to have a load of plants coming across in this space here, and then they're kind of going to be overlapped by these ones here. So using this line here as my guide, I'm going to start putting some flowers in around. We're going to go around this edge next, but we need to do really small flowers because they're the furthest away ones that we're going to really clearly see. So I want to swap down to a 0.1 pen. Here we go, 0.1, right. So that the flowers, and if you swap to a smaller pen, that should automatically make you, or give you an opportunity to draw smaller flowers. And just like we've done this ring here, we're going to do the ring of flowers kind of round here. So it's up to you where I want to start. I think I'm going to start kind of at the top and work my way round. So I'll just be doing flowers, but small flowers. So I'm going to start establishing that ring first. So just a very simple little tiny daisy, and then just the same shapes, but just small. So do the ones that you find easiest to do small. Don't overcomplicate things at the moment. So if it's going to be all daisies, go for all daisies. So this is just little tiny ones. So you can look around and see, right, so we can do some little tiny curlicues, kind of curling round like that. And you do find that when you've got a smaller pen, it really helps when you want to do smaller drawings. Then I'm going to do a small spiral, because I can see a spiral up above, so I can sort of match that one down. And we're going to do some little bumps going around that one. And then I can do a sort of sideways flower. So again, just do the first petal and then the second one, and just a little half moon kind of coming around. Shall I get my camera even closer? See if I can zoom in into the centre. There you go. See, so you can see them a bit closer now. So I'm just doing exactly the same ones. I'm just trying to make them as small as possible. And if you don't feel up to doing them really tiny, just do like daisy flower bumps or something, even just little circles will just give that feeling of things being far away. So that's my sort of sideways flower. And then just a couple more leaves, just to sort of fill that in. And then let's do a daisy, because if in doubt, do a daisy. But what we have to remember is that these are at the very bottom. So if anything above starts to overlap them, we have to fit them underneath. So where we've got this petal leaf sticking out here, we definitely mustn't go on top of that. We've got to sort of stay in the zone. So we're going to just see those few bumps there, and just those little tiny bumps going out into space. And we've done all the way round that sort of one side there with the little tiny flowers. And then as we come around this side, again, it's going to be tiny flowers again, or whatever you want to do, little curlicue spirals. So just going to spiral that round. And I can put a few more bumps in there. So you can just sort of do lots of little bumps if that helps, just to fill out space like that. And it still looks like the patterns, and so that's fine. We can do a tiny version of the ginkgo leaf. So like a big shape like that, well, relatively big shape, and then just draw our lines fanning through it like that. So that's a tiny little ginkgo leaf. We haven't done there's a wobbly fern there. Let's do a tiny wobbly fern. So a sweep, and then little sort of bumps coming round like that, and maybe another little bump like going round in that sort of way. And then I'm going to do a daisy. It's going to be slightly overlapped, going to be underneath that little fern leaf that I drew, but just tiny little daisy. And again, we're getting round to this sort of far edge here, so whatever simplest to do, just let it disappear off into that sort of space around there. And so that's our tiny bottom line. So if I bring the camera back, you can see how, because we've made these tiny, they already look like they're further away from these big ones. So to get the kind of effect of the darkness, I can now get my brush pen and I can colour in up to this line of the edge of all these flowers that I've just drawn in. If you find it a bit daunting doing the brush pen, you can just use a heavier pen, like a fine liner, but like a 0.5 or a 0.8 or something, to outline that edge first, just to sort of give yourself something to follow, so we've got a safety margin, as it were. Here we go, brush pen. Right, so I'm going to just colour in round the edge of those shapes, and if you do slightly go into one, it doesn't matter too much because it's so small you're not going to notice it. but I find it easier to draw like an outline first and go round each of the shapes. And then once I've got that established, I can just colour in a bit more freely. And I'm just going in between the little bumps and making that edge stand out. So I'm just going to come round, move my hand to that sort of just an angle so I can get in there, and just follow the edge of the flowers and the leaves and the petals, and then once that's in, we can sort of bring the brush across and fill in that darkness. Now eventually we will be going back, and I think for us we'll be using some pencil again to shade, so that these little flowers will actually be shaded in a tonal kind of pale grey, so that they look like they're more shadowy. But I'm going to do that sort of the last stage of the drawing, because we're going to get as much of the inside drawn, tunnel drawn first. But that's now our kind of big black hole in the middle in place. So the next thing to do is do the same thing, is do the next row kind of going round, and eventually we'll then fill back the space in between with our kind of floral pattern. But as they come close to the layer above, we'll make them more shaded. So I think what we'll do, so that we can see how that effect's going to work, we'll do the next row of flowers kind of going around there, and then when they're in place, we'll continue this level so it disappears into them, and I'll just show you where to put some shading. And to be cunning, what we'll do is, once we've drawn this level of this ring of flowers in, we're going to shade the space so that we're working on top of the shading area, so it's going to be easier to see where we're working to. But it'll hopefully make a bit more sense when we get there. I'm going to stick to the point 1, because we're still going to be we're still in quite small flower territory. We have to imagine this is the edge of our bottom layer, and this is the edge of layer, sort of, if this was an elevator, this is the ground floor here, so this is level 1, so this is the edge of level 2. So we're going to do again just the same sort of flower patterns and small flowers kind of going around. We did a big Tudor flower kind of up at the top here, so let's do a slightly bigger, I don't mean as in out of proportion, but I mean, you know, a more complicated flower head here. So we do a circle, start it off quite nice and small, and another circle like that, and then some bumps, just some little dinosaur bumps. I just think they look like the bumps on, like, when you see like drawings of Loch Ness Monster or something, or a dinosaur in a kid's book. That's why I think of them as dinosaur bumps. And then some heart-shaped petals, some half hearts kind of going around that one. And that'll do, I think, on that one, but it's just quite nice to have a slightly bigger but still in scale flower, and just a little bit of shading maybe on those lines. And then I want some leaves either side, so let's do some of the classic sort of pointy leaf. And again, we're going quite small with these. They should be small. If you look at the row you've got going below, if you do them slightly bigger, but really doesn't have to be a noticeably bigger at all, they should still be quite small, because they're still quite a long way down. And I put a little bit of leaf on each side, like that. And then I think I'm going to do a spiral snail shell shape here, so just a nice fat spiral coming around until it joins in with the leaf below. And if you ever get a gap you're not sure what to do with, put some circles, and it always looks good, always works. So I can just put a little row of circles in around there. And this line's a bit distracting at the moment because it's a pencil line, so we can rub that out eventually, so it won't be there on the finished thing. So we just do some bumps kind of going around like that. And then the next bit here, I think I'll do, if in doubt, do a daisy. So just do a little circular line. Circular line, draw a circle, I think is what I mean. I don't think you can have a circular line. And then you do your little daisy petals kind of coming round, and I'll put a leaf on it. And then I can put some dots in the centre of the circle to make that look more kind of daisy-ish. And let's put a ginkgo leaf in. So that's the big, relatively big, but of course on this side it's still smaller. And with the vein shapes coming round to the fans. Like that. And we can do a curlicue shape. We're going to do one of those half sort of sideways viewed flowers now. So we do 2 curlicues kind of coming out and a half moon and then some petal shapes. I said any kind of doodle that you like doing will fit into this. What matters is doing the difference in scale. So you've got little ones at the bottom and the same shapes but just drawn bigger at the top. And then we'll put a leaf in. And it's quite good because when you've done the first line, the first circular row, when you come to these ones, you can just look up where you've been, and it's perfectly fine to repeat the ones that you like doing. So just look up and see where you are and see which one your eye falls on and go, right, that's probably the one I can do next, but just at a smaller size. So just put a couple more leaves in. Like that, so we're coming round. And we'll do one of those fern leaves. So a curved line, sort of long, thin S shape, with then sort of like antler wobbles underneath. That's it. So it's given that sort of shape there. And well, I haven't done a lily, haven't I, for a while? So let's do a lily kind of coming out of here. So that's a long V shape and then a little wibbly line and 2 little antennae sticking up and a wibbly line behind. And if only the detail looks like it's going missing, it doesn't really matter because it's far away. So if it's very simple detail and there's less showing, that's fine because it's far away, so you'd expect to see less. So let's put a daisy next to it and bring those bumps round. And we can put a little spiral in there just to fill in the space. We can always fit a spiral in, always fit a little circle in. Right, so I'm going to go back over this side now. I'm going to come around this way again. So I think we can have another daisy in here. And I'm just going to do the front half of the daisy. I'm going to leave that because there might be some overlap from the row above. So as I come down closer, I'm just going to do a few little like half patterns, just following that line, so like bumps kind of coming round. And same with this one here. Put a snail spiral in and just fit it with its dinosaur bumps coming round, and then a small daisy. But for now I'm just going to be drawing the sort of front half of these bits and just put a few bumps in so it leaves us some space later. Okay, so now we've got like, this is the edge of floor level 2, this is the edge of floor level 1. We're going to want to fill all of this space in with flower patterns that disappear off underneath this edge, but we don't want them to blend into one big surface. So this is where the shading will help to make them, to sort of get the shadow in of where these sort of lines are going to come down. So I'm going to put some shading in first so that I know I'm not going to lose this edge here. So I'm going to shade up to, a bit like using the pen, but I'm just going to shade up to the edge of where I've drawn. So all around the edge of those shapes, those flowers, I'm going to shade in there with my pencil. And I'm pretty much going to colour all of this like a sort of pencil tone grey. But I'm just coming up to where I've drawn above. So as if it was an outline, I'm just following that outline in there. So I'm hoping that's making sense. If I come in even closer, I can zoom right in if that will focus. There you are, you can see right in close. I'm laying down some tone first with my pencil. Now, of course, if you're going to do more of these, you could certainly use colour pencils at this point. You could gradiate your colours, so you went down into blue and then you came back up through, went sort of blue, green and into yellow at the top where it's kind of more sunny. That would also work really well. The reason we're putting the tone in now is that it'll be, if we just did all of the flowers, it's going to be quite hard to keep the edges of the level separate because eventually they just all sort of merge into one. But you could paint yourself a watercolour kind of cascade of shading going into darkness, sort of like rings of watercolour, and then when it was dry you could use those rings in the paint as a guide as to how to then you could draw in your flowers. So there's lots of ways of getting this effect, but I think for us it's going to work quite well because it's going to establish the shading as we go down. So once I've drawn all the way in round there, I'm going to just shade in all of this area, and you'll notice that on this bit I'm actually letting my shading come over some of the little flowers that I've already drawn, and that's okay because the only bit I'm going to leave white is the very edge of that bottom layer against the dark abyss, and we may later go back and even get them a bit darker because we're trying to get this sort of shaded effect. So we may be coming back to this later to add more tone to push this even darker, because remember when we're drawing, if things are down a hole or far away, they look darker. So anything that is a shadow or a hole or a crevasse is much darker than the surface because it has less light coming into it. So to give the effect of things going down and down, let's draw back a bit, we need to get this looking darker. So we're going to need to get all this shading in here a bit darker again to pull that kind of, to give it some depth. So once I've got some shading in, I can go back round and darken down, giving myself that base of shadow kind of coming through. And I'm just leaving the edge of those shapes white so that the rest of them are in darkness. So I think I'm going to have to do tone darker on this, but I'm not going to at the moment. I'm going to now put in some flower patterns, and they're going to be the same size as our smallest flower patterns, the same sort of scale and the same sort of shapes. And they're going to grow across that section. So it does start to look like it's dropping away into darkness. But when I'm drawing these flowers on, I'm going to be drawing onto a dark grey background. So I'm still drawing in just the same way, but I'm just putting them onto a grey surface as opposed to drawing straight onto the white paper. And when I'm going to fill in a whole area like this, I'm going to start off by putting in some kind of feature flowers first and then building my pattern around them. So I'm going to put some daisies in. And I have to remember that these flowers on top are always underneath. So if I've got a flower here by that ginkgo leaf, I'm only going to see the front petals because the back petals are going to disappear underneath my row above. So they should always be disappearing down. If I can zoom in closer, and it'll still say in focus, whatever I've got happening here, if I've got a leaf or something, it's going to disappear under the edge of that darker flower. I don't mean darker, I mean the brighter flower, sorry. I'm just thinking it's on top, and for some reason my brain translates that as being darker. I don't mean darker at all. I mean that these ones are on top. So their edge is going to be sharper and whiter and brighter, and the flowers down here are going to be disappearing underneath them. So I'm going to put a snail shell spiral and put its bumps on going round, and just move that round again, and then I can put a frond, a wibbly frond again if I'm going to bring that up and round, and I can do my half moon flower in there and just bring those strands off, disappearing under, and a little spiral in there, and some curly cues maybe just sticking out from under the edge. But as I get under here, I want to get really close together with patterns because almost all of those patterns are going to disappear into darkness. So as I get close to those sort of ginkgo and flowers on the top level, I can almost just do little tiny circles just so that I'm just getting some more pen work, and maybe you're just going to see like a few shapes appearing, but I want lots of pen work in there so I can darken it all down. Maybe put a ginkgo leaf in and really close together with those lines so it becomes a lot darker, and that edge should start getting, all this section should look darker and should look further away, we hope. And I don't worry too much about it. I can just fit in spirals, I can fit in some circle shapes, but I'm more just thinking about now filling in a kind of overall pattern, because I've just put 2 or 3 distinct flowers, and then in between all those I'm just filling in shapes and circles, and really around the edge of the next row of flowers above, just little tiny circles to get that much darker. So I can just sort of push them in, and as I get close to the edge above, really just spirals, circles, anything just to fill that in a bit darker. So yep, coming around here, lots of close together shapes, sort of only need to see little half bits. Might just see the odd petal sticking up, but really it's in the dark, so we're losing a lot of that detail, and it's starting to, but by clustering some really small shapes around this edge, you can see how it starts to give it a kind of shadow. Let's do some more on this side. So you can see where I've clustered them here on this side, I'm getting a sort of shadow effect underneath here. And if I go back to this side, same sort of thing, just really small circles, lots of tiny lines close together, just all clustering round the row above. And I can just do some lines, and I've got already drawn in a couple of shapes so that I can see them, and the rest of it is kind of slightly, it's not cheating, but it's kind of infill to kind of just give me more pen work. It doesn't have to be anything too recognisable. I've got a space here which I think I probably could do something in, so I'll put some curlies going on. So I might just see those, but then all round them lots of tiny squiggly wiggly shapes, just all fitting really dense and close together. So I get more density, more black pen on the paper, more shadow. So I'm just going to fill that last bit in. And you can see how if I bring the camera back again, we're now getting that feel, because we've just left that little edge against the black very, very white, or relatively bright. And we've got the tonal pencil, and as we get close to the next layer above, we do really small little drawings again to give us more shadow. And it may be that eventually we're going to come back and just do some, I'm just using some cross hatching, just doing some lines, a bit like, you know, when we have the flower petals and we just do some lines around the edge of the flower petal. I can just put some shading lines around this sort of overlap here, just across all my patterns, and just to bring more shadow across that bottom section so that we get that sense of it disappearing into darkness. So once I've got the flowers drawn on, I'm just going to work some lines of shading across the top, and part of the pattern will disappear, but we'll start to get that kind of disappearing into the void kind of feel. Yeah, and I think that's already starting to work. I can see that starting to happen. Great stuff. I think that deserves another quick slurp of tea. Okay, right, so we've got about 1/4 of an hour to go on this session. So I'm going to start doing the next level up. I think I'm going to go to a slightly bigger pen. So I was on a 0.1 pen, so I'm going to go for something like a 0.3 or a 0.2. And here we go, I've got point 2. So as we're sort of coming towards the end of this session, I'm going to ask whether you want to continue this next week or whether you feel ready to keep going on your own and share where we get to next week and see how we get on. So, but just have that percolating in the back of your mind. So just in the same way as we did with this one, for each of these rings, we do a ring of flowers, and then we go back and put a layer of tone very gently in, leaving the edge of the one below nice and bright. So it's the same principle for each one. Then eventually, of course, you get really carried away. We could cover all of this surface out here with all these flowers really closely pressed together. Depends on how carried away you get. So same principle here. We'll do another row of larger flowers on this edge. And then once they're in place, we can deal with this kind of area here, because now this area has got to be slightly more shadowed than this area because it's casting a shadow on the bit below. So there's a daisy flower, and I'll put some leaves around it. And I say, if you ever get stuck to what draw next, just glance up to the row above and go, oh yeah, I'll do one of those. And then we can do a fern leaf kind of coming round off there and off this one as well. That's it. And I can do a snail shell, because I looked up and saw that snail shell. I thought, oh yes, I'll do another one. That's it. And we can draw this round like that. And then let's do, we haven't done a pea pod actually on this one, but I won't introduce a pea pod now, but I'm thinking about the dragonfly piece. That had those quite nice pea pod designs, isn't it? We could have used that one. Anyway, so I'm going to do a longer daisy like that coming round. And then if I look round, I could do some curly cues. So nice curlies coming round in a sort of half whirl like that. And bring those round. And we can do a ginkgo leaf here. So I'll do a nice round blobby shape, and then imagine all my veins on this leaf are coming out from that central point under there. And that just sort of fills those in. We could do a lily flower, so we can do a curl either side, and then the long kind of V shape and a wobbly line, and the sort of stamen and a wobbly line again. You always have to watch the pollen on lily stamen. I know my mum once accidentally dyed. She had very white hair, and she went down to look at some flowers, and the stamen brushed her hair and dyed it bright yellow, and it took months to wash out. It was really weird. Wouldn't wash out at all, and she was most annoyed because she had this sort of bright yellow streak down the side of her hair, which was not what she intended at all. And sometimes cats like to eat them, and I believe they give them upset tummies, so beware the lilies. And then I'm going to do a sort of sideways, I think a sideways one, I had a sideways one there. So look, I know I'll do one of the Ace of Spades one. So that's Ace of Spade leaf just tucking in sort of under around there. And the black centre and a line through each petal. And then I can do one of the stacked sideways flowers. So 2 openings up and some bumps coming round and lines coming through, and then a little bit more longer petals kind of coming over. And again, I want to do quite small ones along this edge, because I think they're going to be overlapped by the next sort of row. So just do some little spirals and bumps going round, because we can always fill them in later. So when we get round to these bits, just little tiny bumps following round, and it'll blend into the flowers. So if we then come across to this side here, We can do another sideways flower coming out of these ones, or certainly a kind of curly-Q sideways flower. So I'm trying not to mask my drawing with my hand too much on the camera, and bring those around there like that. And then we can do, if in doubt, do a daisy, just to bring that one into there. And some small leaves. And again, on this edge here, I'm going to do a little tiny flower. And as I come around here, because I don't want to sort of make them too big, because they may be overlapped by the ones above, again, I'm just going to do like sort of a row of bumps, different size sort of ones coming round into that. So that's my next row of things going on. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to get my pencil and I'm going to put some shading following the edge of those flowers that I've drawn above, as if it was an outline. So I'm just going to shade in just up to where I've drawn. I don't have to go quite as dark as I did on the row below, but I might go. Still may have to adjust all these later, but if I get some basic tone in, I can always go darker. The trick is that you can always go darker, but it's much harder to get it to go lighter again. So go, easy, and then once you've got them all the layers in, you can take a step back and say, right, I've got to end up being nearly as dark as my dark zone, so I can go darker, but I'm just going to get something in first so that I can see. I don't want to lose this edge of the row above in the mass of flowers below, so I need to make sure there's some differentiation that I can see where I'm working to. So I just come round working in between all these shapes to infill those. And I'll come round. And it doesn't matter if I overlap some of the ones on the same row, because I'm going to put some shading across all of it in a minute. But and where I've got this just bumpy row here, I can just follow that, and because it's disappearing into that little thin edge, it will all eventually sort of just look like very tightly packed flowers. It won't look strange. And so once that's all shaded in, again, I can bring my shading now across all of that row, but just not quite the edge. So the very edge is sticking out into the tunnel, and it's just catching a bit of light, so it stays whiter. But I'm sort of half colouring, half shading over the flowers that I've got there. Now imagine that our fantastic Cambodian artist that we're being inspired by didn't use pencil shading at all. I think he used incredibly detailed pen work in very, very subtle layers of tone to create this same effect. And that's why I'm not exactly doing what he does, because hats off to the man, but boy, that's a piece of work. We're doing our interpretation of his wonderful piece of work in tribute to his awesome skills. Because otherwise we'd have to have a sort of 6-month-long course of doing the same piece of work, I think, to get it done the same way. So this is giving us a little bit of a shortcut. So that's got some more shading again on that. And then for this area where I've just shaded, I get my 02 pen. And again, I'm not going to try and fill the whole surface in absolutely perfect flower details. But where I've got some areas that I can see, I'm going to put in some more recognisable flowers. So like a daisy can go in there, and a snail shell shape going in there with some bumps around it. But I'm only going to keep the bumps to kind of the front side of that snail shell, and then some more daisy petals kind of coming through on that there, and maybe a little spiral. So it's kind of like I'm not doing complete shapes really as much. I'm doing like a sort of shorthand really, because these are going to be darker, so we're going to lose the detail anyway. And then as I come round, I'm then going to go along this edge of flowers where I just shaded, and I'm just going to fill in with tiny packed circles, and that's giving the impression of there being flower shapes all packed along here. But because they're smaller, more pen work, less paper showing through, again it will look like a line of shadow. It will give that a bit more depth. So it's kind of like a shorthand, just filling in that space. So I'm going to come round, and where I've got these very tightly patched shapes, plenty of shading in there, loads of shading, almost just colouring right up to those lines, and they kind of disappear off into that edge there. And same here along this edge, very, very tightly packed here, because it's getting so small we'd hardly see any detail there at all. So just lots of little tiny bumps, really, not really any detail in that more than that. Maybe just a little spiral if you can manage it, but don't worry if you can't. Just following that edge to bring the pen line, to bring darkness and bring shadow around that daisy shape on the layer of above. They should start standing out a bit more against that white shape. And then I want to make sure that I don't have any areas of grey pencil, that I just fill in with little bumps and swirls, just to give that the feeling there's stuff going on, but I can't quite see it. If you can see a bit more of your space, then you can always put something a bit more recognisable in it. And just come along the edge and follow in that daisy flower, and just some bumps along there, and just thinking about, you know, following that shape at the level above, as it were. And I just want to get some really tightly packed pen work around those shapes, so that that's starting to give me shadow. And if I've got any more grey showing, I can go back in a minute and fill that in, but I'm just following the shape so that the level above stands out bright against the shading below each time. And I've just got to come around that daisy, but really almost just like tiny scribbles, tiny, tiny circles, tiny, tiny spirals, really packed in close together to give me that sort of shadow. And then I can just see some areas of grey here where I might just see a bit more detail. So there I can just put in some spiral shapes and just some sort of daisy sort of swirls to kind of infill. But I'm not going to worry too much about getting really, you know, the most recognisable shapes are going to be on the edge of all these layers each time. So these ones are kind of a shorthand, just bumps and spirals, just so that I don't see a lot of grey tone. I want to just see that really intense surface. And again, that's now given me the feeling of there being some overlay and some shadow there. And if I bring that back, you can see how we are getting a doodle of doom disappearing into darkness kind of feel. If I want to increase that, because I might now, seeing this level here, I might come back here and say I'm going to need to get some more shading. So I'm going to take some more pen shading and just use my pen, or I could use pencils just to darken that shadow down again, because this is meant to be, you know, nearly in the void, so it's got to be a bit darker. You can't really tell that how dark you want to get it until you've got all the layers above. So there we go. We are getting to 1:30 now, so we're going to have to come back together and see how we found that and see where we want to go next week. So I'm just going to stop my video now.